Story 1. This happened around 12 years ago when I was 16. I had just started driving, so I went to my mom's house to work on a school paper because her computer was faster than my dad's. It was getting pretty late, and I was alone at home, but everything seemed normal. I wasn't scared or anything. At one point, I took a break from the paper and went to the main bathroom at the back of the house. The wall opposite the door faced the backyard. The door had a small window in it. Just as I was about to turn on the light, I heard something. It wasn't very close or loud, but it was coming from somewhere in the backyard, closer to the house than the small patch of dense trees which acted as a sort of buffer between the street my house was on and the one that runs parallel to it. At first I didn't see anything unusual, just the regular nighttime view with quiet trees and still shadows. But then I noticed the shape of something moving across the yard. At first I didn't think too much about it. I lived in a normal suburban area, and my house is next to 2 streets. It wouldn't be strange for kids to take a shortcut through my unfenced backyard to reach the other street. Even though I tried to make sense of it in my mind, I still felt a bit uneasy. I was by myself, alone at home, and my parents wouldn't be back for a while. They both had jobs working the late shift at aerospace companies, so this made me a bit worried. I went back to the living room, which had a big window facing the front yard and a glass door to the backyard. For a few minutes everything seemed quiet, so I started to calm down, telling myself that I was probably imagining things or it was nothing serious. But then I heard soft sounds coming from near the back door, like someone walking very quietly trying not to make noise. Now, why would someone do that at night? That got my adrenaline going right away. I called my dad, and I whispered to him as quietly as possible about what was happening. Part of me thought I might be making a big deal out of nothing, but another part felt like something bad might happen. He called the police and stayed on the line with me as I grabbed my keys and headed to the other side of the house where the driveway and my car were. He really didn't want me to leave the house, but there was no way I was staying. So the plan was to drive to my dad's and then come back together with him to meet the police here. I can't explain how much I wanted to get out of there. It felt like the worst thing I could do was wait inside until the police arrived or until whoever was outside decided to come in. When I reached the driveway and walked to the car, my whole body was really focused on what I was doing, but I still heard something. It was the sound of quick and sudden footsteps coming towards me. I ran, unlocked the car door, and started the engine. Then I quickly drove out of my driveway. Thankfully, this was not a horror movie moment where the car engine didn't start. It worked just fine, and I got away just in time. I didn't look back as I didn't want to see how close it was. My dad's workplace was a short drive away, and when I reached him, we went back to the house. I was pretty nervous the whole way back, but luckily the police were already there. We met them, and Dad saw that the house was lit up. Every light in every room was on. Every door, even to the attic and the basement, was open, but nothing was taken or touched. This meant something very important and disturbing. The intruder was looking for people, not things to steal or sell. He was looking for someone, maybe a child, and this scared me a lot, thinking about what might have happened if I had stayed in those rooms like my father said. Would I still be alive? Would I have been taken? I don't know. But sometimes trusting your feelings is the best thing to do. When my mother moved away from that place, I was really happy. I just couldn't sleep well there anymore. Story 2. When I was a teenager, my friend's house got broken into. My mom was away, and I was at my friend Alex's house. We lived in a neighborhood that was neither very rich nor very poor, just regular houses in the suburbs. They were not too special, just typical American homes with yards that were not too big or too small. My friend Alex lived just down the street, and I liked hanging out and sleeping over at his place. Also, I didn't enjoy staying home alone at night. My mom wasn't sure if I was ready for it either, as I was around 12 years old, a shy kid who always played on the Xbox. I didn't do sports and my dad wasn't around much, so I was close to my mom. Even though it might be a bit embarrassing to admit, I was afraid to stay home by myself all night. Luckily, Alex's parents, Josh and Haley, were really nice and let me sleep over. I think it was a Saturday night, and Alex's family had guests over. They were cooking outside and having drinks by the fire. Meanwhile, Alex, his younger cousins, and I were playing in the yard, throwing a ball, jumping on the trampoline, and swimming in their pool. After a few hours of fun, we got tired. We spent some time inside, then went back outside for a bit to hang out with the grown-ups until it was time for us to go in. Around 11, his parents told us to get ready for bed. They put on a movie for all of us kids in the basement and set up sleeping bags. We were watching some horror movie, I can't remember what it was, but I fell asleep after a while. Being a light sleeper, it wasn't a surprise when I heard one of the doors in the basement opening along with some loud footsteps coming down the stairs. I lifted my head to see what was happening, but it was really dark and I couldn't see much. I thought it might be one of Alex's little cousins going to the bathroom or something, so I laid back down, rolled over, and tried to go back to sleep. But soon I woke up to a loud pounding noise. I couldn't figure out what the banging was, but it seemed to be coming from behind us near the stairs. Alex's basement was a good size, and we were in the living room part of it. On the other side there was a bar, about 3 bedrooms, and a bathroom. I thought I heard the noise from downstairs, but I wasn't completely sure. I thought it might be one of the grown-ups, maybe getting something from downstairs, so I tried closing my eyes again. It was really dark down there, and I didn't think it would be a stranger. Or maybe I thought one of the adults went to the bathroom too. I didn't have a phone to check the time or call anyone. I wasn't sure I needed to anyway. I sat and listened for a while, but I couldn't hear the adults partying outside anymore. Maybe they were done for the night and coming in to check on us, I thought. You know when you were a kid and thought there were monsters under your bed or in the closet, that scary feeling, but deep down you knew there was nothing to be scared of because it wasn't real. It kind of felt like that. So I went back to sleep one more time, but this time what happened was way scarier than the last time. I woke up to a man on top of me, shaking me and trying to grab me. He was a stranger, and it terrified me. I could see the fear in the eyes of the other kids and Alex. I tried to fight, kicking and screaming, but eventually the strange man managed to grab me tightly and started to run. I tried everything to get away, kicking, biting, scratching, even trying to poke the man's eyes with my fingers, but nothing was working. I felt so scared. That is until Alex's dad came running and hit the man in the head with a fire extinguisher. We both fell to the ground on the sidewalk, and I hit my head on the cement. Somehow the man managed to stand up and run away. Since he had a mask on, we couldn't identify him. I wonder if things would have been different if the other adults were still there. Maybe they would have chased the man, beat him up, and he would have gotten arrested. After that night, for a really long time, I couldn't sleep. The same bad dream kept coming back and playing in my head over and over. We believe the man got in through the sliding glass door in the basement. I wonder how long he stood there planning the attack. If I had listened to my feelings, maybe things would have turned out differently. Even though I tried my best, I ended up with a concussion. It wasn't too serious, but still a concussion. Since that day, no matter what, I always trust my gut feelings. I recommend you do the same. It's better to be safe than sorry, trust me. I'm also really grateful that Alex's parents were still awake. Otherwise, something really terrible might have happened to me, like getting hurt or taken away, or even worse. Story 3. One night when I was about 13 years old, I stayed over at my friend's house. My friend Ethan and I had a lot in common. We both loved playing video games and watching scary movies. That night, we decided to have a movie marathon. We made a list of all the horror movies we wanted to watch, grabbed some snacks, and settled in for the night. Ethan's parents were out of town, so we had the whole house to ourselves. We started the first movie around 8 p.m. The lights were off, and the only illumination came from the TV screen. As the night went on, we watched movie after movie, each one scarier than the last. By the time we got to the third movie, it was already past midnight, and the house was completely silent. We were both really into the movie when suddenly we heard a loud crash coming from upstairs. We both jumped and looked at each other with wide eyes. At first, we thought it was just the movie playing tricks on us, but then we heard it again. This time it was followed by a series of footsteps. Ethan paused the movie, and we sat there in complete silence, trying to figure out what was going on. Ethan decided to go upstairs and check it out. I wanted to go with him, but he told me to stay put. He grabbed a flashlight and slowly made his way up the stairs. I sat there in the dark, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear Ethan moving around upstairs, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. After what felt like an eternity, Ethan came back downstairs, looking pale and shaken. He told me he couldn't find anything, but he felt like someone was watching him the whole time. We tried to brush it off as our imaginations playing tricks on us, but we couldn't shake the feeling of unease. We decided to call it a night and went to bed. Ethan's room was in the basement, and we both felt a little safer being down there. We locked the door and tried to get some sleep. I had a hard time falling asleep, and every little noise made me jump. Eventually, I managed to drift off, but my sleep was restless. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of whispering. At first, I thought it was just Ethan talking in his sleep, but then I realized the whispers were coming from the other side of the room. I sat up and looked around, but I couldn't see anything in the darkness. I was too scared to get out of bed, so I just sat there, listening to the whispers. They were faint, but I could hear them clearly. They sounded like they were coming from just outside the door. I wanted to wake Ethan, but I didn't want to make any noise. I was frozen with fear, unable to move. The whispers continued for what felt like hours, but eventually they stopped. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, too scared to go back to sleep. When the sun finally came up, I felt a little better, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was not right. Ethan woke up and asked me if I had heard anything last night. I told him about the whispers, and he looked just as scared as I felt. We decided to check the house one more time, just to be sure. We searched every room, but we didn't find anything. There were no signs of a break-in, and nothing was out of place. We tried to convince ourselves that it was just our imaginations, but deep down we both knew something was off. We spent the rest of the day trying to distract ourselves with video games and other activities, but the memory of that night still haunts me to this day. I have no idea what caused those noises, and I never stayed at Ethan's house again. Story 4. I lived in Georgia with my parents for my whole life. Then, one Friday evening while we were having dinner, Dad shared some really important news. He said, "My company offered me a really good job. They want me to be the boss for their work in Florida in a place called Tampa. If I say yes, our family would move there together. The company will pay for moving, and they'll also help us buy a new house if we want." He then said the news surprised him a bit, but he wants us to think about it. He said we could see it as a fresh start since we haven't had a holiday for a while, especially not to Florida, so he thinks we should give it a try. Mom and I nodded and said, "Okay then." Mom asked Dad, "How much time do you have to decide if you want the job?" He said, 2 weeks, and if it's a yes, then however long it takes to buy a house in Tampa." A week later, we had another meeting where we all agreed to the idea of moving to Tampa, Florida. I could sense Dad's happiness because he really wanted this job. Shortly after, Mom and Dad arranged a visit to Tampa to explore potential houses. Typically, they spent long weekends there, returning on Mondays to update me on any properties they found interesting. Unfortunately, it took more than a month to find a good house, but it was worth waiting for. Mom and Dad brought me along for a second look to hear what I thought. The house had 4 bedrooms, an outside hot tub, and a double garage. The gardens weren't huge, but the back one was a bit bigger than the front. Inside, it was modern and the rooms were pretty big. Mom really liked the kitchen, which was twice as big as our current one. My mom is an excellent cook, and her food is the best I've ever had, even when eating out. I liked the house, and after some tough talking, Dad managed to buy it. After that, we got really busy. We had to put our current house up for sale and at the same time go through all the things we've stored over the years. Dad said we need to be strict and only keep what we really use and need. Anything we don't need has to go, as we don't want to fill up the new house with things we're just keeping for no reason. It was a bit surprising for me, but in the end I had 15 boxes of things to get rid of. Some went to charity, and some broken stuff just went in the trash. Dad was almost as bad as me. He had 10 boxes to get rid of. But my mom, she only had 3. After we finished this, it didn't take long to get a good offer on the house, which Dad accepted. Then we picked a day to move in. Just 6 weeks later, we were in the new house, surrounded by boxes and eating takeout. For about 10 days we survived on TV dinners and takeout until we could sort out the kitchen. Finally, we got things in order, but we noticed Dad was spending more time at work learning new systems and getting to know his team. He seemed to enjoy the challenge. Meanwhile, I found a job where I could work from home using my computer. It suited me better than my old office job in Georgia. It meant I could take breaks and go for a swim in our big hot tub. It was more like a pool, but the water was warm as it had a cover with those cool massage jets. After that, I had lunch on the patio and then went back to work. It felt so different from before. We had 2 houses nearby, one on each side. The house on our right was empty, and there was a sign in the front yard saying it was for sale. You could see through the windows that there was no furniture inside, and there were never any cars in the driveway. The house on our left was lived in, but the owner hadn't tried to talk to us since we moved in 2 weeks ago. We thought it was just a man living there because we saw him driving in and out in the early evening, but he never had anyone else in the car with him. I waved at him twice when he got out of his car, but he just stared at me for a bit too long and then looked away each time. Mom said some people are just strange, so not to worry much about it. There are folks who hear you say hi or see you wave but choose to ignore you. Maybe it's how they were raised or part of their culture where it's considered rude to say hi back on whatever planet he's from. Story 5. I was born in a small village in Italy. My childhood was filled with the aroma of fresh pasta, the sound of church bells, and the warmth of family gatherings. My parents owned a little trattoria, where they served the most delicious food in town. I spent my days playing with my siblings and helping out in the restaurant. Life was simple and beautiful. However, when I turned 18, I decided it was time for a change. I wanted to see the world, experience new cultures, and find my own path. So, I packed my bags and moved to New York City. New York was a completely different world. The skyscrapers, the bustling streets, and the diverse cultures were overwhelming at first. I found a small apartment in Brooklyn and started working at an Italian restaurant. The job was tough, but it reminded me of home. I made new friends, learned new skills, and gradually adapted to the fast-paced life of the city. Every now and then I would call my parents and tell them about my adventures. They were proud of me, but always reminded me to stay true to my roots. One evening, after a long shift at the restaurant, I decided to take a walk in Central Park. The city lights were sparkling, and the air was crisp. As I strolled through the park, I stumbled upon a small group of people gathered around a street performer. Curious, I joined the crowd. The performer was a young woman playing the violin. Her music was enchanting, and I was mesmerized. After she finished her performance, I approached her and struck up a conversation. Her name was Lily, and she was a talented musician from Paris. We quickly became friends, and our friendship soon blossomed into a romantic relationship. Lily and I spent every moment we could together. We explored the city, shared our dreams, and supported each other's ambitions. She introduced me to the world of music, and I taught her about Italian cuisine. Our relationship was a beautiful blend of cultures and passions. We even started performing together. She would play the violin, and I would sing traditional Italian songs. Our performances became popular, and we were invited to play at various events around the city. However, as time went on, we faced challenges. Balancing our careers and relationship was not easy. There were times when we argued and times when we doubted our future together. But through it all, we never gave up on each other. Our love and commitment grew stronger with each passing day. We learned to communicate better, support each other more, and cherish the moments we had together. One winter evening, as we were performing at a cozy cafe in the West Village, I realized how much I loved Lily. The way she smiled, the way she played her violin, and the way she made me feel was indescribable. After our performance, I took her hand and led her to a quiet corner of the cafe. I looked into her eyes and told her how much she meant to me. Then, I got down on one knee and proposed. She said yes, and we were both overjoyed. We got married in a small ceremony in Central Park, surrounded by our closest friends. It was a magical day filled with love, laughter, and music. My parents flew in from Italy, and Lily's family came from Paris. It was a beautiful union of two cultures and two families. After our wedding, we continued to pursue our passions and dreams. We traveled the world, performed at various venues, and created unforgettable memories together. Years have passed since that day, and our love has only grown stronger. We've had our share of ups and downs, but we've always faced them together. We've built a beautiful life, filled with love, music, and adventure. And every time I think about our journey, I feel grateful for the day I took that walk in Central Park. Story 6. When I was a child, my family and I would spend every summer at our cabin by the lake. The cabin was a small, wooden structure nestled in the woods. It had a rustic charm that made it feel like a second home. My siblings and I would spend our days swimming, fishing, and exploring the surrounding forest. The evenings were reserved for family dinners and storytelling around the campfire. It was a tradition that we all cherished. One summer, when I was 12 years old, something extraordinary happened. It was a hot, sunny day, and my siblings and I were playing by the lake. We were splashing in the water and laughing when suddenly we noticed something glimmering at the bottom of the lake. Curious, we dove down to investigate. To our surprise, we discovered an old, rusty chest. We managed to bring it to the surface and opened it. revealing a collection of old coins, jewelry, and a mysterious map. We were thrilled by our discovery and immediately ran to show our parents. They were equally fascinated and encouraged us to follow the map. The map seemed to lead to a location deep in the forest, so we packed some supplies and set off on an adventure. The journey was not easy. We had to navigate through dense underbrush, cross a small stream, and climb a steep hill. But we were determined to uncover the treasure. After hours of trekking, we finally arrived at the spot marked on the map. It was a small clearing with an ancient oak tree in the center. We searched around the tree and soon found a hidden trapdoor. Excitedly, we opened it and descended into a dark, underground chamber. The chamber was filled with old artifacts, paintings, and books. It was like stepping into a forgotten world. We spent hours exploring the chamber, marveling at the treasures we had found. When we returned to the cabin, we couldn't wait to tell our parents about our adventure. They were amazed by our discovery and praised us for our bravery and determination. That summer became one of the most memorable experiences of our lives. We spent the rest of our vacation cataloging the artifacts and researching their history. We even donated some of the items to a local museum. As the years went by, our family continued to visit the cabin every summer. The memories of that extraordinary adventure remained a special bond that we all shared. The discovery of the hidden treasure taught us the value of curiosity, perseverance, and teamwork. It also reminded us of the magic that can be found in the most unexpected places. Story 1. My family used to live on the far edge of a city on the West Coast. I was born in the city, but I do not live there anymore. The city is known for having a lot of problems like high crime rates and run-down areas. Before, I naively thought that if you dealt with one of the few landlords on the outskirts, it would be fine. However, things weren't as simple as I had imagined. The problem started about a month before the big finale. My stepfather was out of town to deal with a family issue, so it was just my mom, my two little sisters, and me at home. Our landlord, who I thought was normal, began showing up on the property a lot more often than usual. At first it seemed like he was just checking on things, but then he started coming by almost every day, sometimes late at night, which made us all feel uneasy. Nothing creepy happened at first, but he kept talking a lot about the bushes that grew on the side of the yard. He talked about what kind they were, when they would bloom, and how the flowers looked. This went on for about a week before he finally told us that he wanted to sell the land we were living on. He said we needed to start packing up and looking for a new place to live. Then, one night, everything got really weird. He showed up way before we were supposed to leave and started yelling at us, saying all the cars had to be moved from the side of the property by a certain date. Then he wandered off to an empty lot next to the house, took off his shirt, and started spinning around in circles. My family was really scared. We thought we were done dealing with the landlord for the day, so we started to relax. But then, out of nowhere, the landlord came back, driving up the driveway with a few tow trucks. Since my mom didn't have a driver's license, she couldn't move the cars like the landlord demanded. We ended up calling the sheriff for help while desperately trying to reach my dad on the phone, hoping he'd come home soon. The sheriff arrived and saw the landlord yelling at the tow truck drivers, demanding they take everything away and bill it to my dad. We explained to the sheriff that we had been given several days to move the vehicles, but the landlord showed up with the tow crew on the same night. The sheriff talked to the landlord, trying to calm him down. Eventually, the landlord stopped screaming at us, at least for a moment, but we were worried he might come back the next day to cause more trouble. Then, while we were cleaning up the house, the sheriff stopped my mom. His face was serious as he said, "I think he might try to come back and get into the house. If he does, just call us. I can't tell you to hurt him, but if he forces his way inside and you're scared for your family, you do what you have to." We got out before the landlord returned, which was a relief. We ended up staying with my uncle for a while until everything was ready at the new house. It was a bit stressful not having our own place for a bit, but we made it work. But whenever I go back to my old hometown, I can't shake the worry of bumping into our former landlord. Story 2. I'm not exactly sure what happened at the time, but somehow we lost our home even though later we bought that same house again. But for a few days we had to find a new place to live. We lived in a nice place outside of Lockhart, Texas. Following some searching, my parents found a trailer park. The trailer had 2 bedrooms. It was small for our family of 5, but we didn't have other options. The man who owned the trailer park was not a good person, but he's not the main character in this story. We lived in that trailer for a few months before we had to leave again. Not far from where we lived in the trailer park, there was a cul-de-sac of land. In the middle of these houses there was a place called the Why Not Party House. It was like a bar or a club, I guess. Since I was a kid, I never went inside. There were some houses and trailers spread out, and one of them was an old trailer that was available to rent. The man renting it, Mr. All was an old man. A couple of things about this trailer: it had old stone steps leading up to the front door, and the paint was peeling off the walls. It looked like it had been there for a long time, with a rusty mailbox out front and a porch with a few old steps. In one of the bedrooms there's a bunk bed, and there's also a kind of working air hockey table. The main bedroom had a big bed, like a queen-size one, and it's weird, but there's carpet in the kitchen. The back door was nailed shut and couldn't be opened at all, and if that wasn't bad enough, there were mice all over the place. My parents agreed to rent the trailer just by talking about it without any formal papers. Before we moved in, Mr. Dahl decided to make a new deck for us instead of the old steps. He even made a small picnic table for us to use outside. It was surprising to me as a kid that someone I didn't know could be so kind and take the time to make our home better. A mean person wouldn't do that kind of thing, would they? The first few weeks of rent from him went by without any problems. The main bedroom had no light bulbs, so my family and I all slept in the living room. But something about the bedroom with the bunk bed seemed scary to me. I'm not sure how my brothers felt, but they never slept in there either. Sometimes we were late with rent and had to pay extra fees, but apart from that, Mr. Dahl would understand everything, even if he got a bit annoyed sometimes. My mother's money came in on the first of every month, which was also when the bills were due. So she, my dad, and my older brother went into the city to pay the bills and get a money order for rent. I stayed home with my oldest brother. It was a time when we didn't have internet or cable, just VHS movies. Then, in the hallway, my oldest brother found out that the trailer was turned over. But something I want to tell you all, we didn't have any keys to this trailer, and the only person with a set of keys was Mr. Dahl, so we couldn't lock or unlock the trailer. While I was playing my game right by the locked door, I saw the knob turn. There was no knocking, the knob just moved, and our landlord tried to open the door twice, but he couldn't do it. He probably thought nobody was home because the car was gone, but the door was locked, so I thought it was okay to keep playing my game. That's what an 11-year-old thinks. Everything was silent for a while. Then my brother and I heard this noise outside our house. I thought it was a dog barking, but the longer we listened, we realized it was not an animal. Instead, it sounded like people yelling. My brother went to check out the noise at the front door, and because I was scared, I followed right behind him. Both of my parents were standing outside in the yard. My mother was yelling at the landlord, who was sitting on a big farming vehicle. My mom looked really mad, and her voice sounded really angry. My father was also shouting at him, but I can't remember exactly what they said. Later we found out when my parents came back to our trailer with the money order for rent, they saw Mr. Dahl sitting on the farming vehicle, trying to block the main door of our house. My mom went into full protection mode because she knew her 2 children were stuck inside. She confronted him right away. Mr. Dahl moved away from the door and quickly spun the vehicle around, coming dangerously close to my mom, almost hitting her with it. They didn't know what to do, so they called the police. When the police arrived and my parents told them what happened, it didn't help because we didn't have any legal agreement for renting the trailer. The officer just shrugged and said there wasn't anything they could do as nobody got hurt. We packed up as much as we could in our car and stored the belongings we took with us at my grandparents' house. Then we rented a motel room for the night. About a week later, we decided to go back for the rest of our belongings. We were worried about running into Mr. Dahl, so we chose to go to the trailer at night. When we arrived, it was dark inside, and the porch light was off. My father and oldest brother went into the trailer. My mom and I were waiting in the car. In less than 5 minutes, my father and oldest brother ran out of the trailer faster than I had ever seen before. They looked really scared. They jumped into the car, and we sped away like in an action movie. My mom was terrified and kept asking what had happened, but they were too shaken to explain right away. When they calmed down a bit, they explained they went into the main bedroom first, which was on the right as soon as you walked in. They were planning to get a box of papers we had to leave behind, but then they saw something on the bed. It wasn't just someone sleeping, it was Mr. Dahl, and next to him there was a big knife. We couldn't get back the rest of our furniture. My mom and I talk about it sometimes, but we're glad it's in the past. I can't help but wonder if all that abandoned furniture belonged to another unfortunate family who had to leave everything behind or had it even worse than us. Story 3. The apartment building where I lived with my family was old and had seen better days. It stood in the middle of a neglected neighborhood, with peeling paint and creaky floors. My parents chose it because it was cheap, and we didn't have many other options. The landlord, Mr. Hawkins, was a tall, thin man with a perpetual frown. He rarely spoke to us, except to collect the rent or give us vague warnings about the building's quirks. One night, after we'd been living there for a few months, strange things began to happen. It started with small, almost unnoticeable events: lights flickering, cold drafts in the middle of summer, and faint whispers that seemed to come from the walls. My parents brushed it off as the building's age, but my siblings and I were spooked. One evening, while I was doing my homework in the kitchen, I heard a loud thud from the living room. My little sister, who was playing with her dolls, screamed and ran to me, saying she saw a shadow moving on its own. I tried to calm her down, telling her it was probably just a trick of the light. But deep down I was scared too. The next day my mom decided to talk to Mr. Hawkins about the strange occurrences. He listened to her concerns with a furrowed brow, then reluctantly admitted that the building had a history. He told us about a previous tenant who had died under mysterious circumstances. The official report said it was an accident, but rumors of foul play had persisted for years. Some believed the tenant's spirit still lingered in the building. That night, my mom did her best to reassure us, but we couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As the weeks went by, the strange events became more frequent and more intense. Doors would slam shut on their own, objects would move inexplicably, and the whispers grew louder. My dad, a skeptic by nature, tried to find logical explanations, but even he started to feel uneasy. One particularly terrifying night, we were all awakened by the sound of shattering glass. We rushed to the living room to find the window broken and a cold wind blowing in. My dad called the police, thinking it was a break-in, but they found no evidence of anyone entering or leaving the building. The officers left, scratching their heads, and we were left with more questions than answers. My mom, determined to protect her family, began researching ways to cleanse the apartment of any lingering spirits. She found an old book on spiritual rituals and decided to give it a try. We gathered in the living room, following the instructions from the book. We lit candles, burned sage, and recited incantations, hoping to banish whatever was haunting us. As we performed the ritual, the air grew thick with tension. The candles flickered wildly, and the whispers became deafening. Just when we thought we couldn't take it anymore, everything suddenly stopped. The candles burned steadily, the whispers ceased, and a sense of calm settled over the apartment. In the days that followed, the strange occurrences gradually diminished. We still felt uneasy at times, but the overwhelming sense of dread had lifted. My parents decided it was time to move, and we found a new place on the other side of town. It wasn't perfect, but it was a fresh start. As we packed up our belongings, I couldn't help but wonder about the spirit that had haunted us. Had we really banished it, or had it simply chosen to leave us alone? The mystery of that old apartment building remained unsolved, but we were grateful to leave it behind. To this day, I still get chills thinking about our time there and the shadowy presence that lurked within those walls. Story 4. When I was about 14 or 15 years old, I went to a friend's party at their house in the UK. That year was really great for me. I didn't have any big worries, no work to do in the mornings, and my mom cooked dinner for me. I had nice clean bed sheets that I didn't have to clean or change. Then, life really got tough. But there's this one thing that really got to me. Once I went to that party I talked about earlier at my friend's place. She invited about 50 people. Most of them, like 90%, were from our school, but around 10% weren't. There were some older guys there. At first it felt weird because I didn't know them. Being 14 and a girl, I was cautious. Some of those guys seemed older than 16, maybe even 18. I mostly hung out with my school friends, the ones I knew and trusted. My main friend, who threw the party, was super busy talking to everyone and getting things sorted. Anyway, the evening was great, good food, good drinks, and awesome music. But then came the tricky part. I had to figure out how to get home because my mom didn't even know I was there. Obviously, I couldn't drive at 14. You might be wondering how my mom didn't know I was at the party. Well, she was on vacation and I was home alone. Well, except for my older brother, who just stayed glued to his computer all day. He didn't care if I was there or not, and it would probably take him 2 months to even realize I was gone. So, I was at the party, but I needed to get home. One of my friend's moms had given me a ride there. Then I thought it was only about 10 minutes away, so I'd just walk back once the party ended. My friend decided to end the party around 1 a.m. because her mom started getting upset. Even though her mom didn't really care about what anyone was doing, she said she needed to sleep because she had worked the next day. So, after all that, I left. I didn't ask for a ride from anyone because I didn't want to bother them, and hardly anyone there drove anyway. There were only 2 guys who drove, so they must have been at least 17, which made me think they were definitely older than us. I started walking home. It was dark, and some street lights were out. As I walked, I noticed car lights behind me. The car wasn't going at a normal speed like the others that had passed me. It was going really slow. Finally, the car stopped completely, and the guy rolled down the window. I recognized him from the party. He asked if I needed a ride, but I got the creepiest feeling from him. I decided to say no and keep walking, but he was persistent. He drove alongside me at my walking speed with the window still down. He kept saying things like, "You shouldn't be out here at this time of night. It's too late. Come on, it's getting cold. Let me give you a ride back." The more he insisted, the more suspicious he seemed to me. It raised more and more red flags, and I was just about ready to run. He suddenly stopped the car. This totally caught me off guard because he'd been driving alongside me for the past 5 minutes, urging me to get in the car. I turned to face him, not sure what to do. I knew I couldn't run from him. He was much bigger and faster than me, and I was wearing shoes with about 3-inch heels, so I wouldn't stand a chance. I realized that if something bad was going to happen, the only thing I could do was scream for help. So that's what I did. I just screamed as loud as I could, like I'd gone completely crazy. Eventually, almost everyone on the street heard me, and several neighbors opened their windows. The guy just stood there, his car still running. I think he noticed that everyone was watching. He looked up at all the windows with people and lights on. 2 of them had their windows open and were just looking out. They didn't say anything. I think they were just curious. Once he saw them, he turned around, got back in his car, and quickly drove away. Some of my friends say he's a nice guy, but he didn't go to our school. He actually went to college, but I didn't know him and didn't want to get in his car no matter what. Story 5. In 2012, during the winter, I found myself staying late at the library. The sun had already set, leaving the surroundings dark. It was evening, and the usual buzz of my friends studying alongside me was absent. I couldn't recall the reason why they didn't come. As I gathered my belongings, the library announced it was closing in 5 minutes. I was totally focused on studying because I had a test in just 3 days. I gathered my books and packed them into my backpack. Then I slung it over my shoulder and headed towards the library exit. It was so quiet that it felt like the silence was loud. Libraries are always quiet, but it felt like I was the only one there besides the lady who worked there. When I stepped outside, I felt how freezing it was. The temperature had dropped a lot, and when I looked around, there wasn't anyone else on the campus at all. I walked all the way back to where I lived, but before I reached home, something really scary happened. About halfway there, I had to cross a big road. The campus is divided into 2 parts, which is kind of weird. I don't know why they designed it like that, but there's a highway running through the campus. Crossing it during the day was no big deal, but at night it was definitely more challenging. There's this big flight of steps that goes over the highway. Some people call it a flyover. It's like a bridge where you walk on top to cross over. It's pretty cool. When I visited Europe and the UK, I saw a lot more of them there. They're quite common in those places, but not so much where I live, or at least not in the state I'm from. I reached the steps and started climbing, making sure to watch my step. It was only the beginning of winter, right after fall, so there wasn't much snow yet, but it was really cold with frosty temperatures. I was bundled up in warm clothes, wearing a beanie hat and a scarf, but I was still freezing. The worst part was my nose. It felt so numb and tingly. I climbed up the first set of steps, and now I had to walk across the highway on the platform. So, that's what I did. As I reached halfway across, I noticed a few cars passing by. The traffic had quieted down by then, I guess because rush hour was over. Most folks had already made it home from work. maybe around 7. There were a few cars passing by, but nothing unusual. That is, until I reached the end of the platform. I was about to go down the second set of steps to get back on the other side of the highway when I saw something really weird. The speed limit on the highway was like 80, maybe even faster. I'm not a driver, so don't quote me on that, but all the cars were going fast. Then there was this one van. It looked like the kind of van you'd imagine some creepy person driving, trying to snatch people up. I couldn't believe it. They weren't driving at the speed limit or even close to it. They were going really slow, like a snail's pace. I thought maybe they were lost, but how do you get lost on a highway? I was getting closer to them because they were going so slow. It seemed like their van might stop right where the stairs met the ground. As I went down the stairs, I was really nervous, trying to be quiet and still avoiding their eyes. But now I was even more scared and unsure about what was happening with the people in that van. I was about halfway down the stairs when I noticed the van had stopped right at the bottom step. Getting closer, I could see 2 men sitting inside, completely concealing their faces in the darkness. I could see their mouths and tell they were guys by their jawlines. I slowed down, pretending to be cautious of the ice while I thought about what to do next. Something felt off, so I didn't want to go all the way down the stairs. If their van had broken down, they'd get out and put their hazard lights on, but they weren't doing any of that. They just sat there. As I got closer, they were watching me, following my every move. That was it. I turned around and started running back up the steps toward my campus. But somehow I slipped on the ice and tumbled down, landing hard on my forearms. I used them to catch myself, and it hurt a lot. The concrete steps felt like they broke my bones. I got up, but my arms felt really sore, like they were shattered. But I didn't care about that right then. I started sprinting back across the platform. I thought I heard the van door open and close, and it made me run even faster. I was breathing hard, panicking more with each step. When I reached the other staircase to go back down, I didn't even think about the ice. I just kept running, skipping steps and almost fell again, but I made it down to the first step without slipping. I didn't dare to look back as I was too scared of them. In my head, I felt like they were right behind me, like they were chasing me. I made it back to the university campus and dashed into the library. Luckily, the worker hadn't left yet. She looked surprised to see me in such a panic. I told her everything that happened, and she suggested we call campus security. After a while, campus security arrived and offered to drive me home. They also checked the area for the van, but they couldn't find anything. They said they'd look into it more, but I never heard back from them about what they found. It was the scariest thing that ever happened to me, and to this day I still get anxious walking alone at night. Story 6. I lived in Spain for a while when I was younger. There was an old, ruined building at the edge of the town. It was always shrouded in mystery and had many stories about it. Locals said it was haunted, but my friends and I were skeptical. We decided to check it out one weekend. We went to the building during the day as it was less scary. The place was as creepy as it looked from the outside. The floors creaked, the walls were covered in graffiti, and there were broken windows everywhere. We explored every corner, laughing at our fears and trying to spook each other. As we were about to leave, I found an old, dusty book in one of the rooms. It looked ancient and fragile. Curiosity got the best of me, so I opened it. The pages were filled with strange symbols and drawings. My friends gathered around, equally intrigued and freaked out. Suddenly, we heard a loud noise from upstairs. We all froze, looking at each other with wide eyes. One of my friends suggested it was just the wind, but we were all too scared to check. We decided to leave the book and get out of there as fast as we could. We ran out of the building and didn't stop until we were back in the town center. Later that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the book and the noise. I felt like something was watching me, and I had trouble sleeping. The next day, my friends and I agreed not to go back to the building again. We never found out what caused the noise, and the memory of that day still gives me chills. Story 6. I work as a security officer for a company in Southern California. We team up with the sheriff's department to keep the areas we serve safe. My role as a patrol officer is quite similar to that of a police officer. Unlike typical security guards who simply observe and report, we're trained to respond to a variety of situations, from dealing with trespassers and burglaries to handling domestic disputes. I've chased after people on foot and in vehicles a few times. It's just how we do things. Now that you understand our job, let me share with you an experience I will never forget. Usually I worked the late shift, but because of low manpower, I had to switch to the day shift. I remember driving around the city in my patrol car, listening to our radio for calls. Then one came in from my district, a burglary alarm on the north side of the city, out in the desert. It must have been around 1 in the morning when I was sent to check it out. As soon as I turned onto the street for the property, I went dark, which means I turned off all the lights. The building used to be where they packed onions with big hangars on the west side, but now it's empty and we're hired to keep an eye on it. I've gone inside many times during my nightly checks, but nothing unusual ever occurred until this particular night. Also, keep in mind there are no working lights on the property, so everything inside was dark. Anyway, I drove to the west side of the property, checking the outside carefully. That's when I noticed a door that was slightly open. I radioed in. "This is Lincoln 1. I found a door open on the west side of the hangars. Can you send another unit to my location?" I was standing next to my car, having a smoke in the rare drizzle that Southern California gets. I actually enjoy the rain. The wind's pretty strong tonight too, if I recall correctly. After about 5 minutes, my buddy and partner shows up. He's actually a really close friend of mine outside of work. We grab our flashlights and head inside. The first thing that hits you when you walk in is the strong smell of onions. I mean, it's so strong that you can practically taste it in your nose. The hangars we're checking are big, dark, and empty, with that stinky smell everywhere. This is where things start to get disturbing. We can hear the light rain tapping on the metal roof, the wind finding its way through any openings it can. Then it happens we hear footsteps on the roof of the hangars. I glance at my partner and say, "These hangars don't have a way up to the roof." "Then how did they get there?" He shrugs and says, "Dude, I also have no idea." Lincoln 1 to Control. Just to let you know, we're hearing footsteps on the roof. We're on the scene investigating. We'll update you soon, dispatch confirms. And we start searching through the building, checking every corner. Then we step outside and check around the building. Just as I suspected, no way up to the roof. Why would anyone be up there in this weather anyway? We blame it on the wind. We check everything we can and call it Code 4, meaning all good. As we're walking back through the hangars we just checked, which is the only way out to get back to our vehicles, something really creepy happens. Now, I've never believed in ghosts or anything like that, and I always thought those ghost shows on TV were silly. They always talk about hearing whispers on those shows, but never understanding what's being said. Well, believe it or not, my partner and I heard whispering, like multiple voices all at once. It was crystal clear, but I couldn't make out a single word. My partner and I stood dead in our tracks and just looked at each other, frozen in place. I called in a Code 6 again, and we started searching the property once more. We knew what we heard wasn't normal, but we had to check if someone was possibly still inside that we missed. That's when everything went crazy. Doors started slamming shut all over the place. My partner and I just looked at each other without saying a word. We walked outside. I can't say we were scared, but we were definitely surprised. I reported a secondary Code 4. I'm outside with my partner and I glance at him. "Let's just say it was the wind," I said. That was the last time I ever went to that place before I got promoted to corporal and switched to day shifts. I still don't believe in most ghost stories, but I can tell you for sure it wasn't just the wind that night. Story 6. When I was 12 years old, I lived in a small town in Washington. I think it was summertime, and I was excited to spend time with my best friend, Rose. I asked my grandma if I could stay over at Rose's house, and she nodded yes. When I arrived at Rose's place, one of our classmates, a boy whose name I can't quite recall now, also came to her house. He had this new game he was excited for us to try out. He lived 2 houses down from her. We arrived at his house around 6:30, but honestly the game he brought wasn't very fun, so I ended up just staring out of his bedroom window. It was really dark outside, and all I could see were our reflections in the window and the glow from the TV. I was sitting right next to the window, and if I leaned a bit I could see up into the tree branches. So I glanced up and saw 2 red eyes looking back at me. I got really scared and tried to see what was there, but it was too dark to make out anything else. All I could see were those red eyes. I felt my throat tighten, and I started shaking. I turned to my friends by the TV and whispered, "Guys, look up at the tree." "Can you see what I see?" Rose looked at me, then at the tree, and she froze, looking really scared. Our other friend looked too, but then he ran out of the room. We both chased after him because we definitely didn't want to stay alone. He found his dad sitting in the living room watching TV. At first his dad didn't believe us, but eventually he got up and looked outside. He saw the eyes too, just staring at us like they could see right into our hearts. Our friend's dad grabbed his baseball bat and told us to stay inside. He hurried out the back door and closed it tight behind him. But soon after, we heard our friend's dad yelling at whatever was in the backyard. And then he rushed back inside, almost breaking the door in his haste. He gathered us all into the master bedroom, which was the only door that locked besides the main and back doors. Soon enough, the police arrived, but when we told them what happened, they didn't believe us. They just said we were imagining things. But we knew deep down that it wasn't just our imagination. How could 4 of us, including an adult, all see the same thing?